Welcome to Driveway Garage. I just bought another project to work on. It's a 2013 Dodge Avenger with a 2.4 liter four-cylinder. And I went to look at it. It was, after I started it, started right up. It was a little slow starting. Took like 5 seconds. But the engine was nice and smooth. It ran good. But after about 5 minutes, it started to overheat. So it was about 2 miles from here at their house, so I put a garden hose to the radiator because, well, let me flip this around. The radiator is kind of hidden. It's up front here, underneath here. But I added some coolant to the radiator cap, and I added some to the tank. And it seemed like it was steaming out on this side. As fast as I was putting water in, it was just blowing steam. And I knew it wasn't just from me spilling a little bit of water when I put water in it. So I checked the engine codes, and it said it needed a camshaft sensor, and there were like 6 codes. 5 of them had to do with the temperature control, things like that, radiator. So I told her I was gonna watch some videos, which I did. And these have a big plastic housing over here. This is part of it, and it goes over further that way. And there's a thermostat down below. There's a thermostat right over by the engine there, that little round thing. There's 2 thermostats on it. The heater core hoses go to the back of it. You got your top radiator hose, your bottom radiator hose. So I went back to look at it, and I put my hand down inside of here, and I felt on the thermostat housing, and I could feel a hole in it. So I knew that was part of the problem. So we negotiated a price, and I bought it. I ordered the parts. I ordered a camshaft position sensor and the housing. Now the housing, I got it replaced. It was kind of a bugger because they got all these wiring harnesses stuff, and you got to take those 2 clips off in the back there to get those hoses off. And I made a video on doing all that, but I got that done, and I got it started, and it wasn't leaking. And I drove it home 2 miles and picked up my stepson and went back to get my other vehicle, and it died when we got down there. And I was like, well, it's something to do with when it gets warm, it dies. So I left it, and I went back this morning. And I also saying there was a bunch of unmetered air getting around the throttle body. So I thought, well, maybe I just, hooked up something bad or wrong. So I took this hose off, top and bottom, disconnected this clamp, took it apart, looked at it really good, put it all back together. Everything seemed fine. When I was trying to replace this camshaft position sensor down here, I was moving this back and forth a lot because I didn't disconnect it from the bottom. I thought, well, maybe I cracked it or wiggled it off. I'm still not sure what the problem was there. I might not have had it on completely tight at the bottom like it belonged, but I put it back together, and it started, and I just drove it straight home. And it was kind of hesitating. So I took the spark plugs out and looked at them, and this is what they look like. We have brown, off-white, and brown. And this one, the cleanest looking one, was a little damp. So I thought, well, that thing, if it's damp, it's not firing. So I took the coils off. And in order to do that, you pull these tabs back, and then you just push down on this tab, and they come right off. It's super easy, just like that. When you put them back on, push your red tab on. So I took those off and started the car, which was hard to do. Then I lifted the coils up one at a time. I didn't have these bolts in there. And this spark plug, or this cylinder, was doing nothing. Well, that's where that tan spark plug was. So I switched this coil with this coil, and it still did it in the same spot. So I was like, well, I have a bad spark plug, or this coil, this wire's not, giving any spark to the coil. So I ran down and got new spark plugs for it, put them in, and it started a lot easier. I'm sure it was probably some built up gas and stuff in that cylinder, but it starts up, but when you rev it up to about 2,000 RPMs, it'll go up to 2,000, down to 1,800, up to 2,000, down to 1,800. And it keeps telling me every time I start the car, the check engine light comes on, tells me the camshaft position sensor is bad. Well, I already replaced it. Now, unless I replaced it with the bad one, something else is going on. And I've been watching videos. They say a bad alternator can do that because it's not putting out a constant charge and it's messing up the input to the camshaft position sensor. And of course, this monitors the cam underneath the head there, or on top of the head underneath this. And so I'm just going to have to delve a little deeper into it. It starts up and it doesn't run bad, but when you give it gas, it just goes up and down and up and down. I haven't taken it for a test drive. I'm going to do that. So I'm going to do some more research and see why that camshaft position sensor is not working. And as far as I know, there's only one. It's right there. But there's a possibility there's another one on the back. And maybe it said bank 1, sensor A, I think, if I remember right. But I know from watching videos, sometimes you get misinformation. So I'm going to do some more research, see if there's another one of these sensors on the back of the motor. And there's also a crankshaft position sensor, which is down there. It's easier to get at it from the bottom. There's a heat shield over it. You got to bend the heat shield out of the way, and then you can get to it. But I'm not going to go there till I have to. I really want to find out why this camshaft position sensor that I replaced is not working. But, well, just for the fun of it, I'll pause this and start it. Well, I'll just leave it running. I'll start it and you can hear it run. Hear it start. If you're having a similar problem, check your spark plugs. That was a big part of the problem because you got a 4-cylinder running on 3 cylinders. And then the overheating part was, of course, a hole in the thermostat housing. Let me start this up. Now before, you would crank and crank and crank and it didn't want to start. So, right now, just idling, it seems like it's idling pretty smooth, about 800 RPMs. But if I rev it up and keep my foot on the gas constant, see how it goes up and down about 200 RPMs? So that's the problem. I just have to find out what's causing it. And while you're watching, I'll show you the thermostat housing I took off. They're a pain. Mostly they're a pain because of the way the hoses are. It's really hard to get to them with all those. When you have to take the breather box off and this tube, this sensor and this, the sensor for the thermostat, the upper and lower radiator hoses, this hose, that gives you access to get down in there, but you're buried. You see where those 2 hoses are back there. And you got this big wiring harness in the way, and there's more on the back. You can't get in from there. It took me longer to do that, just getting those hoses disconnected and connected back up, than anything. And this is another real pain, the camshaft position sensor. Because even if you take this out of the way, there's this wiring harness that's fastened to the manifold. You got a wiring harness up here. There's a plastic bracket. Let's see if you can see it. Plastic bracket right there in the way. Now what they did was they made a little notch, a little cutout in the front of that plastic down here, so you can get a socket in there, but you got to get it past all this stuff, and it's really hard to get it lined up. And then you got to try to get your fingers in here and over here to try to pull that camshaft position sensor out of there. And then you got to get it back in there, and it's not exactly straight up and down. It's tilted. The top plug there is almost at 1 o'clock, but not quite. So I was lining it straight up and down. If you look there, you can see the bolt is off to the side a little bit. So It's not just straight up and down. So that took me a while to figure that out. This should be a 5-minute job. Turned out to be about 30 to 45 minutes. Trying to get the bolt in and the right. You got to get an extension that comes out here, but it can't be too long. It was just a royal pain. Now back to the thermostat housing. Like I said, when I put my hand in there, felt around, I could feel this hole. So I knew that's where that steam was coming from. And you can see the way it's made. You got your heater core connections here, upper and lower radiator hoses here. There's a sensor on the top here. Now there's actually a thermostat. And look at how this melted. They told me, oh, we never drove it. It didn't get hot. This is melted. This was melted. So they got it plenty hot. I'm just hoping they didn't do anything. And that got hot enough there. And I'm guessing, I don't know if this thermostat stuck shut and then it got hot and melted that or what. But and there's my camshaft position sensor that I replaced. That might be good. Then there's a thermostat temperature gauge right here that goes in, sensor. You have to swap that over. It was a lot of fun. It took me a few hours instead of a few minutes, but at least it starts, it runs. It's just out of sync a little bit, and I'm just hoping I don't have to pull the heads or the head, you know, get into all that kind of stuff. I hope it's something simple. Maybe another sensor someplace. But sometimes you just got to start with the basics, you know. I was going to go down and grab some spark plugs, but I thought, well, I better check stuff. So I swapped the coils, and it was still on the same place. And as you saw by these spark plugs, you would think they would all look like that, all nice and clean firing. But there's another thing. Hear that? I keep getting that tapping sound. It's like an actuator. I don't know what it goes to. I got to figure that one out. But so pull out your spark plugs and check them. In this case, even though it looks good, it's a bad spark plug, and they're pretty worn. So I'm guessing it failed internally because it's not sparking. But I just went ahead and replaced all 4 of them. That fixed the hard to start issue. Now I just have to figure out the not running issue. Thanks for watching. When I find out more information, I'll make another video on what it takes to fix it, and I will let you know.